I'd like to show you something weird I found. Whilst I was trying to kill some time during my divorce hearing, I decided to start browsing Wikipedia, and I stumbled across the page for the Kingdom of Powys. Never heard of it? That's okay, it hasn't heard of you either, but it holds some importance to me because that's the county I'm from. And while I was reading the article, I noticed that someone had done me the great favour of randomly bolding one single word, making it stick out on the page. Apparently, the land that would one day become Powys used to have an entirely different name, one that I'd never heard of before. But unlike the last time I found something like this one was much more robust. It had a source, a proper citation. Surely following this paper trail will work out just fine. This is how a Victorian hoax was accidentally revived in 2013. This is the medieval kingdom that never existed. According to the article, the death of a man named Cadell, recorded in the medieval text known as the Annales Cambriae, mentions this kingdom, Teyrnllwg. But this is wrong in two ways. Firstly, no it doesn't. We have three versions of the Annales, A, B and C, none of which say anything about Teyrnllwg at all. The A text just mentions the death of Cadell Powys, the B text calls him Powysorum Rex, and the C text swaps them with Cadell Rex Powyssi. Powys, Powys and Powys, no Teyrnllwg. But, like I said, this strange sentence has a citation, and checking that out we can see what went wrong in the second way. The source cites a different text, the Brut, and never claims that this is found in the Annales. Checking the Brut, short for Bruta Tywysogion, we also, of course, don't find it. Oh, there it is. In the 1864 English and Welsh translation by J. Russell Smith, quoted exactly the same as it is in the Wikipedia article source, which came out 13 years prior. Cadell, King of Teyrnllwg, now called Powys. This should be the end, right? Just a mistake in saying what source it came from, but one thing stood out to me. In the more modern translations of Bruta Tywysogion, Teyrnllwg isn't mentioned at all. In fact, Teyrnllwg doesn't seem to be mentioned in any other medieval source, just Bruta Tywysogion, and only in copies from or after the 1850s, along with a few other random 19th century texts. What's going on here? To start, the article and its source don't seem to be precisely clear about what Teyrnllwg is supposed to be, especially when compared to other sources. To me, the land of Teyrnllwg now called Powys implies either a name change or one kingdom replacing the other. The article calls the early dynasty the House of Teyrnllwg, implying one continuous country, but other mentions aren't so sure. One text from 1881 notes that Saint Germanus anointed Cadell and made him King of Teyrnllwg. And while the kings of Powys supposedly descend from him, they seem to be two separate things. This was also echoed by a few sources from the late 1800s, although they were much more dramatic. One tried to identify Teyrnllwg with modern-day Cheshire. One claimed that it was the lands between Chester and a town called Shrewsbury. And more bizarrely, a paper from 1956 apparently tried to locate the lost Kingdom of Teyrnllwg to somewhere in the northwest of England. None of which are connected to Powys at all. But what's especially dramatic are three sources which connect this land of Teyrnllwg not to Powys, not to Chester, but to the entire northwestern coast of England, explicitly from the River Dee to the Derwent in Cumbria, citing a text known as the Principal Territories of Britain. Huh. So as we can see, mentions of Teyrnllwg did exist prior to 1851 when the Wikipedia article's source was written, but the nature of what it was changed over time. From a land outside of Powys, to a kingdom that the kings of Powys were descended from, to an area encompassing northwestern England, what had started as a search for a random bolded name in a Wikipedia article had now spiraled into one of the weirdest rabbit holes I'd seen in a long time. Because, again, Teyrnllwg is never mentioned in any medieval source. That quote I read where Cadell is made King of Teyrnllwg, that's an 1881 retelling of the Historia Britannicum, another source, and one that also doesn't mention Teyrnllwg anywhere. This source had also caught me off guard slightly and made me notice something I hadn't noticed before. Some of these texts aren't talking about the same person. We have a mention of a Cadeth from the 9th century, whose death is mentioned in the Wikipedia source, but we also have one from about 400 years prior, the Cadeth mentioned in the quote I read, and in this source claiming Teyrnllwg was in Cheshire. What had happened here? What or where is Teyrnllwg? Why were two different men being claimed as kings of a place that has zero mentions before the 1800s? Why did the scope of it expand so much? And why did it disappear, only to make a comeback on this Wikipedia page decades later? Having a citation is all fine and good, and as we've seen, it even actually says what the article claims it does. Almost, but you'd be surprised how often that isn't the case. In fact, we even have a corroborating piece of evidence, a second mention of Teyrnllwg in that 1864 translation of Bruta to Asogion. Everything seems sound, robust. But what is their source? If we can cite translations from the 1800s, we should be able to do the same with more modern ones. But we can't. Teyrnllwg isn't in them. Where did they get this from? Where did everybody get this from? Unfortunately, almost none of the texts mentioning Teyrnllwg ever state their source. The 1819 translation of the Historia Brittonum cites the OPMS, something that I, to this day, don't understand. Wikipedia's original source cites the Mov Arch 2, still fairly cryptic, but it would come in handy soon, and I would have looked for that first if it wasn't for the very last text I checked. The third source that claimed Teyrnllwg was supposedly comprised of the northwest of England is from a historical journal, and is actually critical of the story, but regardless, they finally cite a comprehensible source. And it's a surprising one. They cite something called the Iolo manuscripts, a series of papers collected and published by the son of one of the most infamous forgers in all of British history. Iolo Morganwg is a complicated figure. He was a talented writer and poet, it's just that he unfortunately used some of his writing talent to forge several medieval manuscripts, all of which were published by Iolo's son after his death. And it's in these manuscripts that we can find Teyrnllwg and an answer to one of the questions I'd been wondering for a while. How did it grow from Powys to supposedly encompassing the northwest of England? Well, do you remember that one of those sources cited a text called the Principal Territories of Britain? That turns out to be one of Iolo's forgeries, and it's the most blatant one you'll see today. He is the source for the unfounded claim that Teyrnllwg stretched from the Dee to the Derwent, and luckily for me, someone else had already figured out why. In the same source that pointed me towards Iolo in the first place, is a claim that these boundaries represent the old Diocese of Chester, another one of the places that several people claimed Teyrnllwg was a part of. And according to the Diocese of Chester's website, that seems to check out. Iolo is also the source for Cadeth being the King of Teyrnllwg as mentioned in the Wikipedia source. In a single sentence, he references Brochwel, a historic king of Powys, naming him as the son of Cyngen, son of Cadeth Teyrnllwg, king of Teyrnllwg. And it's here where the origin of this mysterious name finally makes itself known. Cadeth had an epithet, a nickname which were common amongst Welsh kings. They usually described appearance, personality, something so arbitrary became completely lost from history, or a location. And it seems that Iolo interpreted Cadeth Teyrnllwg as belonging to the latter, just another one of the many kings named after the place they ruled. Except, of course, Teyrnllwg isn't mentioned prior to this, and Iolo was the first to create this massive kingdom supposedly covering the old Diocese of Chester. So even if it looks like it could have been a simple misunderstanding at first, if we examine the whole picture, then it really seems like the entire thing was just another forgery, one that had some popularity for a few decades, until fading into obscurity. If you're curious, modern historians like Peter Bartrum believe Teyrnllwg, or the order Teyrnllwg, was a composite word, Dwrn meaning hilt or hand, and Llyg meaning bright or gleaming, with Bartrum's suggestion being Cadell gleaming hilt, not Cadell of Teyrnllwg, a kingdom never mentioned a single time prior to Iolo's publishing. Right? Well, there are a few things that don't fit. Do you remember how there were two Cadells claimed as the King of Teyrnllwg, with a Wikipedia source choosing the later one? Well, Iolo chose the earlier one, and the later Cadell is never given this epithet by anyone. Furthermore, Iolo's manuscripts were published in 1848, but that one source claiming Teyrnllwg could be found between Chester and Shrewsbury was published in 1819. Is there something more to this? Well, do you remember Mov Arch, that mysterious text cited by the Wikipedia article source? I hadn't given it much thought after finding the Iolo connection, but now it seems like it could be my only lead. And after some time searching, I found it. The Myfyriwr Archaeology of Wales, published in 1801, decades before Iolo Morganwg, and inside was that very same entry supposedly from Brut y Tywysogion. Cadell, King of Teyrnllwg, now called Powys. A kingdom derived from the epithet of a monarch with the same name, only one who died centuries earlier. This was surely then the source for those other two Brut y Tywysogion translations, the source for the text that became the citation used to revive this old Victorian hoax in this Wikipedia article. That 1819 text gives this kingdom back to the older Cadell, although they also attribute it to his epithet, an idea that they seem to have gotten from the Myfyriwr archaeology, as Teyrnllwg's never mentioned any time prior to their publication in 1801. What does this all mean then, that Iolo Morganwg isn't to blame? Well, I decided to do some digging. I was mostly just curious about what Myfyriwr meant, and on their Wikipedia page I found something very interesting. The purpose of these texts was to publish the medieval manuscripts and poetry of Wales, and it was worked on primarily by three men. Owen Jones was the founder, and William Pugh was the head editor. And do you want to guess who was in charge of finding the manuscripts to publish? That's right. Edward Williams, better known by his bardic name, Iolo Morganwg. It all comes full circle. So as we've seen, the reason why this random name is on this Wikipedia article, the reason why this kingdom spanning anywhere from Powys to Chester to the northwest of England ever existed at all, was because of a fraud. Whether it was the published manuscripts of Iolo Morganwg or something he previously managed to sneak into a genuine publication, he is the source, attributing an old epithet as an ancient country's name, and expanding its borders to a ridiculous extent. And while it did eventually fade away completely, it managed to accidentally get revived by a Wikipedia editor back in 2013, when that fateful sentence attributing it to the wrong medieval source and accidentally citing a paper that was quoting from an unknown forgery was added to the page. In 2015, this was enhanced by the addition of the Kings of Teyrnllwg, and this is basically where the page stands today. Just an old, forgotten Victorian hoax, accidentally brought back to life 212 years after it was first fabricated. And unlike some of the other hoaxes I featured in previous videos, it's had basically no impact. Searching Teyrnllwg brings up practically nothing, except for the Wikipedia page and the History Hit website. Is nothing sacred? Except, there is something. One last piece of information I found that summarizes exactly how and why something like this can happen in the first place, and it might not be where you'd expect. In the popular strategy game Crusader Kings II, where you get to play as various medieval counts, dukes, kings and horses, you have the opportunity to play as the rulers of medieval Powys. Now, when this game was released in 2012, Teyrnllwg hadn't been added to the Wikipedia article yet, and consequently, all of the kings of Powys are just called of Powys. However, if you buy the expansion pack called Charlemagne, which lets you play the game all the way back in the 8th century, we can find something very unexpected. The Count and County of Teyrnllwg. Spelt wrong. But this wasn't a typo, because this expansion was released in 2014, a year after this Victorian hoax was added to the Wikipedia article. But when it was added, it was spelt wrong. Teyrnllwg, not Teyrnllwg. The author had read their source wrong, and this mistake went unnoticed for 4 years, until another user presumably checked the source for this claim and noticed that the original author had misspelt it. And honestly, I think this is a great example of how and why strange things like this old Victorian hoax can not only make it onto Wikipedia, but can last there for over 11 years. Because the source it cited, with the correct spelling, was right there for 4 years, and no one, from random users to major game developers, ever even checked it. If they had, they would have seen that it was spelt wrong. They wouldn't have added the Count of Teyrnllwg to this game. But they didn't. No one checked it. This citation could have been literally anything. The problem that topics like Welsh history face on Wikipedia are that they're very niche. Even when someone did check the source, how are they to know that this translation and another translation were both based off of a Victorian hoax? How would the original author have known that? I think that Wikipedia is a great resource, but one of the problems of relying on community moderation is that that community needs to exist. And thanks to this video, you now hopefully know a bit more about this period of history, about where this name came from, and about the man who created it. Regardless of whether or not you remember it, as of right now, this community exists, and that's always been the aim of my channel. So next time you play Crusader Kings II, you'll know that the Count of Teyrnllwg never actually existed. It was simply a typo of a translation based on an 1800s hoax, turning Cades Teyrnllwg into a king that ruled a colossal kingdom never before mentioned in history. And you'll know that it was only ever included because this forgotten hoax was revived on accident by an editor who didn't know the century of misinformation behind the source that they were citing on a random Wednesday in 2013. Thank you for watching.